The air was heavy with grief as mourners filled the small chapel of Willow Creek, their somber faces reflecting the loss of Margaret Hayward, a kind and generous woman who had touched the lives of everyone in the village. Outside, the sky was overcast, a gray blanket of clouds draping over the town as if nature itself mourned her passing. Inside, the only sound was the quiet sniffles of those who had come to pay their respects. Among the crowd was Buddy, Margaret's beloved golden retriever, lying obediently near the casket. For as long as anyone could remember, Buddy had been Margaret's constant companion. Wherever Margaret went, Buddy followed, his gentle presence offering comfort to anyone in need. He had been there during her happiest moments and had stood by her side through her darkest days. Today, his large brown eyes brimmed with an unmistakable sadness, as if he understood the weight of the moment. As the priest began the eulogy, a soft whimper broke the silence. Heads turned toward Buddy, who had risen to his feet. He let out a low bark, his gaze fixed on the casket. The bark grew louder, echoing through the chapel. Some mourners exchanged puzzled glances, while others tried to hush the dog, whispering soothing words to calm him. But Buddy refused to settle, his barking now a mix of urgency and sorrow. In the front row, Margaret's nephew Adam frowned as he watched Buddy's unusual behavior. Adam had only recently returned to Willow Creek after years of living in the city. He had always admired his aunt's compassion and resilience, and her sudden death had shaken him deeply. As Buddy's barking persisted, Adam couldn't help but feel a strange unease settle over him. The dog wasn't just being disruptive. There was something more to his actions. The priest, Father Bernard, paused mid-sentence, clearly flustered. "Please, someone take the dog outside," he said, his voice strained. A few people moved to grab Buddy's leash, but the dog evaded their grasp, circling the casket and barking more insistently. "Buddy, stop!" Adam called out, stepping forward. But as he reached for the dog, Buddy turned to him, his eyes filled with an intensity that sent a chill down Adam's spine. It wasn't just grief. Buddy seemed to be trying to say something, to warn them about something no one else could see. Father Bernard's nervousness grew palpable. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead as he shuffled uncomfortably behind the podium. "Please, let us continue with the service," he urged, his voice trembling slightly. But Adam couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy's behavior wasn't random. There was a desperation in the dog's actions that struck a chord deep within him. Adam knelt beside Buddy, stroking his fur to calm him. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. "What are you trying to tell us?" At that moment, Buddy stopped barking and nudged Adam's hand toward the base of the casket. Adam's heart raced as he looked at the spot the dog indicated. Something wasn't right, and Buddy seemed determined to reveal what it was. The mourners, now caught between grief and curiosity, watched in silence. The chapel, once a place of quiet reflection, had become the epicenter of a mystery no one could have anticipated. Adam hesitated, his hand trembling as Buddy nudged him again, insistent and unyielding. The mourners murmured quietly, their eyes darting between Adam and the casket. Even those who had initially dismissed the dog's behavior as grief-stricken confusion now couldn't ignore the tension in the room. There was something hauntingly purposeful about Buddy's actions. Father Bernard cleared his throat, his voice straining to maintain authority over the situation. "Mr. Hayward," he said, addressing Adam directly, "this is neither the time nor the place for disruptions. Let us focus on honoring Margaret's memory." Adam stood, meeting the priest's gaze. "I think Buddy's trying to tell us something," he said firmly. His voice carried an edge of defiance, cutting through the priest's attempt to regain control. Buddy barked again, now scratching at the base of the casket. His movements were frantic, his claws scraping against the polished wood with a sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the chapel. Children clung to their parents, their small hands gripping tightly, while elderly mourners whispered prayers under their breath. Adam knelt once more, placing a calming hand on Buddy's back. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "I'm here." He turned to the priest. "If this is nothing, then let me check. It'll only take a moment." Father Bernard's face flushed, a deep red spreading across his cheeks. He stammered, "There's nothing to check. Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep, as you all know. Let us not disturb her rest." But Adam noticed something unusual in the priest's tone, a nervous edge that hadn't been there before. His hands, gripping the edges of the podium, trembled slightly. Adam's instincts kicked in. There was more to this story than anyone was letting on, and he couldn't let it go. Ignoring the priest's protests, Adam gently pulled Buddy away from the casket. The dog reluctantly complied, but stayed close, his sharp eyes fixed on the wooden box as if it held a secret too heavy to keep hidden. Adam knelt by the base, his fingers tracing the edges where Buddy had been scratching. A sharp gasp broke the silence as Adam's hand brushed against something unusual. The base of the casket wasn't seamless. There was a tiny gap, barely noticeable, but it was there. He pressed lightly, and a faint creak echoed in the still air. The mourners leaned forward collectively, their curiosity now overpowering their grief. "What are you doing?" Father Bernard's voice rose sharply, his calm demeanor crumbling into panic. He stepped down from the podium, rushing toward Adam. "Stop this at once!" But Adam had already wedged his fingers into the gap, prying it open slightly. His heart raced as the panel shifted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the casket. Gasps rippled through the room as he pulled it open. Inside lay a stack of papers, folded and bound with a red ribbon. Adam's eyes narrowed as he picked them up, his fingers trembling. Written on the top page, in Margaret's handwriting, were the words, "If anything happens to me, trust Buddy. He will show you the truth." The room erupted in whispers, and all eyes turned to Father Bernard, who now stood frozen in place, his face pale. Buddy barked again, his tail wagging slightly as if to say, "You've only just begun." Amid the commotion, the heavy chapel doors creaked open, and a tall, lean man stepped inside. His arrival was unexpected, his figure casting a long shadow across the aisle as he walked purposefully toward the group gathered around the casket. He wore a simple black coat, the collar turned up against the chill of the day. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, finally settling on Adam. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm Elliot Grayson. I knew Margaret." Adam raised an eyebrow, clutching the bundle of papers tightly. "You're a little late," he said, his tone guarded. "The funeral's already started." Elliot nodded, his face somber. "I didn't come to mourn. I came because I believe Margaret was in danger before she passed." His words sent another wave of gasps through the crowd, and Adam felt his grip on the papers tighten. Father Bernard, still standing frozen near the casket, finally found his voice. "This is outrageous! How dare you come here with baseless accusations? Margaret passed peacefully, as I've told everyone." But Elliot's piercing gaze landed on the priest, silencing him instantly. "With all due respect, Father," he said, "I think there's more to her passing than you've admitted." He turned to Adam. "May I see those papers?" Adam hesitated, his instincts torn between trust and suspicion. Buddy, however, seemed to sense something in Elliot, wagging his tail and nuzzling against the newcomer's leg. The gesture was enough to sway Adam, and he handed over the papers. Elliot carefully unfolded the top sheet, his eyes scanning the words. "This is her handwriting," he murmured, his voice tinged with both sadness and urgency. He read aloud, "If you're reading this, then I didn't leave this world naturally. Someone close to me betrayed my trust. Follow Buddy, he knows who to watch." The room fell into stunned silence. Adam's gaze flicked to Buddy, who was now sitting alert, his eyes fixed on Father Bernard. The priest took a step back, his hands trembling. "This is absurd," Father Bernard snapped. "Are you all going to believe a dog's behavior over reason? Margaret was an elderly woman. Her death was tragic, yes, but natural." But Elliot ignored him, turning to Adam. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his tone urgent. Adam explained the hidden compartment in the casket, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "Buddy led me to it. He's been acting strange since the service began." Elliot nodded, his expression grim. "Margaret told me once that she trusted Buddy more than most humans. She said he had a way of sensing things we couldn't." He glanced at the dog, who was still focused intently on Father Bernard. "And right now, it seems like he's telling us where to look next." Buddy barked once, a sharp, clear sound that seemed to echo with purpose. Whatever secrets Margaret had left behind, Buddy wasn't done leading them to the truth. Father Bernard's unease became palpable as Buddy's sharp barks filled the chapel once more. The mourners, once gripped by sorrow, now looked to the priest with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The tension in the room was thick, every whisper and gasp amplifying the sense that something was deeply amiss. "I must insist we proceed with the service," Father Bernard said, his voice trembling. This spectacle dishonors Margaret's memory." Buddy, as if sensing the priest's discomfort, stood his ground, his steady gaze fixed on Bernard. The dog growled low, a sound that sent shivers through the mourners. Adam and Elliot exchanged glances, the same thought passing silently between them. Buddy was pointing to something, or someone. "Why are you so eager to end this?" Adam asked, stepping closer to the priest. "We're all here to remember Margaret, but it seems like you're more concerned with what Buddy's doing than anything else." The priest stiffened, his eyes darting nervously. "I've served this community for decades," he snapped. "I won't stand here and be accused of what? Allowing a dog to disrupt a sacred ceremony?" Before Adam could reply, another voice cut through the murmurs. "Enough." The crowd turned toward the back of the chapel, where Walter Hargrove, Margaret's longtime neighbor, stepped forward. Walter was an imposing figure, his thick frame and booming voice commanding attention. His face was ashen, but his expression was firm. "Margaret and I were close," Walter began, his voice steady but strained. "If Buddy's acting this way, there's got to be a reason. That dog was her shadow. She trusted him more than anyone." Father Bernard shot Walter a sharp glare. "And what do you think this proves, Walter? That a dog can uncover secrets? This is absurd." Walter ignored him, turning instead to Adam and Elliot. "I know Margaret better than most. If she left a note saying to trust Buddy, then I say we do exactly that. She wasn't one to make baseless claims." Elliot nodded, his attention fixed on Walter. "You were her neighbor for years, weren't you? Did you notice anything unusual in the days leading up to her death?" Walter hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the priest. "I don't want to stir up trouble," he muttered, his voice faltering. "But trouble's already here," Adam said sharply. "If you know something, now's the time to speak." Walter's shoulders sagged under the weight of their stares. "She mentioned feeling watched," he said reluctantly. "Said someone had been snooping around her house late at night. I told her to call the police, but she waved it off. Said she didn't want to make a fuss." The revelation sent a ripple through the crowd. Eyes turned once more to Father Bernard, who was now visibly sweating. His hands clutched the podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Why would someone be watching her?" Adam pressed. "I don't know," Walter replied, his voice heavy. "But Margaret wasn't paranoid. If she felt something was wrong, it probably was." Buddy let out another bark, snapping everyone's attention back to him. The dog had moved, standing now between Adam and Father Bernard, his gaze unflinching. Elliot knelt beside Buddy, his eyes narrowing as he studied the priest. "I think Buddy knows exactly who we need to question," Elliot said, his voice low but firm, "and I think we're just getting started." Father Bernard's face went pale, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. The room grew still, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on everyone present. The chapel fell into a tense silence as all eyes shifted between Father Bernard and Buddy. The dog's unrelenting focus on the priest was impossible to ignore. Adam, emboldened by Buddy's determination, took a deep breath and stepped closer to the casket. "We've already found one hidden compartment," Adam said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "If Margaret left us a trail, I think Buddy's telling us there's more to find." Elliot nodded, kneeling beside Buddy. "Margaret was clever," he added. "She wouldn't leave something as important as this without making sure it could be uncovered." Father Bernard's composure cracked further. "You're wasting everyone's time," he snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "Margaret was an old woman who passed peacefully. This spectacle is nothing more than baseless speculation." "Then let us prove it," Adam replied, his tone sharp. Buddy barked again, shifting his attention to a nearby flower arrangement placed beside the altar. The arrangement was one of Margaret's favorites, daisies and lavender, tied with a simple white ribbon. Without hesitation, Buddy nosed the base of the stand, scratching lightly at the wooden floor beneath it. Adam moved quickly, kneeling where Buddy directed. He felt around the base of the stand, his fingers grazing the edges of a loose floorboard. "Here," he said, looking up at Elliot, "there's something hidden." With the help of a nearby mourner, Adam pried up the board, revealing a small metal box tucked inside the hollow space. It was worn, but locked tightly. A faint gasp rippled through the crowd, and Adam's heart pounded as he lifted it from its hiding place. Elliot inspected the box, running his fingers along the edges. "It's locked," he murmured, "but if Margaret left this behind, the key must be somewhere." Buddy barked twice, wagging his tail. The dog turned sharply, heading toward the side of the chapel where Margaret's personal belongings had been placed on display. A photo album, a favorite scarf, and a small jewelry box. "Of course," Adam said, following Buddy. He carefully opened the jewelry box, sifting through its contents until he found a tiny brass key. It was worn and simple, a perfect fit for the box. With trembling hands, Adam unlocked the metal box. Inside was a stack of papers, similar to the ones they had found earlier. These, however, were different. Each sheet was filled with detailed notes, receipts, and photographs. Elliot took the papers, scanning them quickly. "These are financial records," he said, his brow furrowed. "And they're damning?" Adam leaned over his shoulder. "What do you mean?" "They show that Margaret's charitable fund has been drained," Elliot explained. "And look, every withdrawal was signed off by Father Bernard." Gasps filled the chapel, and all eyes turned to the priest, who now looked as if the ground beneath him might swallow him whole. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice barely audible. Buddy growled low, standing firm beside Adam and Elliot. The dog's posture, unwavering and protective, seemed to say, "We're not done yet." The tension in the chapel reached a boiling point as the mourners turned their gazes toward Father Bernard. The once revered priest now stood frozen, his face pale and beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. The damning evidence in Elliot's hands left little room for doubt, but Adam could feel there was more to uncover. "Father Bernard," Adam said, his voice steady but sharp, "why does Margaret's money lead back to you? These withdrawals are in your name." The priest's lips trembled as he attempted to form words. I was helping her manage her accounts," he stammered. "She trusted me. These records don't mean what you think they do." Elliot raised an eyebrow, his expression unimpressed. "Helping her? By draining her fund completely? The same fund meant for the orphanage she was building?" He held up one of the receipts for the crowd to see. "These are large sums, transferred repeatedly to accounts that don't belong to her." Whispers erupted among the mourners. Suspicion, once whispered in quiet corners, now spread like wildfire. Adam scanned the room, noticing the unease growing among the attendees. Margaret's charitable efforts were well known in Willow Creek. The idea that someone could exploit her generosity was unthinkable. Buddy barked sharply, drawing everyone's attention back to the altar. The dog's focus hadn't wavered. He stood firm, his body positioned protectively in front of the altar steps. His gaze locked on Father Bernard, unwavering and intense. "What else are you hiding?" Adam asked, stepping closer to the priest. "Buddy hasn't stopped trying to tell us something. If there's more, Now's the time to come clean." "I've told you everything," Father Bernard shouted, his voice cracking. "This is nonsense, a witch hunt based on a dog's instincts." Buddy let out a low growl, his stance tightening. The growl was quiet, but carried an unmistakable warning. The room fell silent, the mourners too stunned to speak. Elliot's voice broke the silence. "Margaret knew something was wrong, didn't she?" he said, staring at Bernard. "That's why she left those notes. That's why she wrote, 'Trust Buddy.' She knew she wouldn't be able to tell anyone herself." The priest opened his mouth to respond, but his words were drowned out by the sound of Buddy's bark. This time, the dog turned toward the wall behind the altar. He barked again, his tail pointing straight as he nosed at a decorative panel. Adam exchanged a glance with Elliot, then stepped forward. "This isn't over," Adam said. He reached for the panel, feeling along its edges. His fingers found a latch, cleverly concealed beneath the ornate design. He pulled it, and with a soft creak, the panel swung open to reveal a hidden recess. Inside was another box, this one larger and locked with a sturdy padlock. Buddy barked again, his excitement palpable, as if to confirm they were on the right track. Adam turned to Father Bernard, his voice cutting through the charged air. "Where's the key?" he demanded. The priest's face contorted with fear. I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Buddy growled again, louder this time, as if to say, "He's lying." Adam turned to the mourners, his voice firm. "We're opening this. Margaret wanted the truth to be known, and that's exactly what we're going to do." Father Bernard took a step back, his hands shaking. The walls were closing in, and the truth, whatever it was, seemed moments away from being fully revealed. The tension in the chapel was suffocating. All eyes were locked on Adam as he held the newly discovered box. Buddy's tail wagged faintly, his sharp gaze fixed on Father Bernard, who now seemed visibly shaken. The priest's denial had done little to sway the growing tide of suspicion among the mourners. Adam glanced at Elliot, who nodded silently, his expression resolute. "We need to open this," Adam said firmly, holding up the padlocked box. "Does anyone have something we can use to break it?" Walter Hargrove stepped forward, his expression grim. "Wait here." He left the chapel and returned moments later with a heavy pair of bolt cutters. "If Margaret trusted Buddy, then I trust him too," he said as he handed them to Adam. Father Bernard raised a trembling hand. "You're desecrating her memory," he cried. "Margaret wouldn't have wanted this chaos." Adam ignored him, gripping the bolt cutters with steady hands. With one swift motion, the padlock snapped open and the heavy metal box creaked as he lifted the lid. Gasps filled the room as its contents were revealed. Inside were stacks of detailed documents, photographs, and more financial records. Among them was a handwritten letter from Margaret herself. Adam unfolded the letter with care, the weight of its importance sinking in as he began to read aloud. "If you found this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell my story. Someone close to me has betrayed my trust, someone I thought I could rely on. Father Bernard has been stealing from the fund I created for the orphanage. He threatened me when I confronted him and said no one would believe me. If anything happens to me, please use this evidence to expose the truth. Trust Buddy. He will guide you to what needs to be found." The chapel erupted in murmurs of shock and disbelief. The mourners, once silent in their grief, were now filled with anger and confusion. Margaret's words left no room for interpretation. Elliot sifted through the documents, pulling out photographs showing Father Bernard meeting with individuals at the local bank. "These confirm everything Margaret wrote," Elliot said. "He's been funneling money out of the fund for years. And here, look at this." He held up a photo of Father Bernard standing in front of an opulent villa outside the village. "Margaret must have been investigating this herself," Elliot added. "She was gathering proof." Father Bernard staggered back, his face drained of all color. This is a mistake," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I can explain." "Explain what?" Adam shot back, his voice hard. "Why you stole from her? Why you threatened her?" Buddy let out a low growl, moving to stand between the priest and Adam. The dog's protective posture was unmistakable, his loyalty to Margaret shining through even now. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Father Bernard finally blurted out, his voice cracking. I only wanted to—" "To what?" Walter interrupted, his voice booming with anger. "To take advantage of her kindness? To silence her when she caught you?" The weight of the accusations hung heavily in the room. Father Bernard's shoulders sagged as he sank to his knees, the fight seemingly drained from him. Tears welled in his eyes, but the crowd was unmoved. Buddy stepped forward, his nose brushing against the papers as if to punctuate the truth. Margaret's words, her trust in her faithful dog, had brought them to this moment. Father Bernard remained on his knees, his hands trembling as the full weight of his actions came crashing down on him. The mourners stood frozen, processing the shocking revelations. The chapel, once filled with sorrow, now buzzed with anger and betrayal. Margaret's words, meticulously preserved in her handwriting, had unmasked the priest for who he truly was. Adam turned to Walter. "Call the police," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "This isn't something we can handle on our own." Walter nodded and stepped outside to make the call. Meanwhile, Elliot began carefully organizing the evidence they had uncovered, ensuring nothing would be lost or overlooked. The financial records, photographs, and Margaret's letter painted a damning picture, leaving no room for Father Bernard to hide. "Margaret trusted you," Adam said, his voice heavy with disappointment as he stared at the priest. "She gave you her trust, her faith, and you used it to betray her. And when she found out, you silenced her." "I didn't mean to hurt her," Father Bernard cried out, his voice cracking. "I never wanted this to happen. She confronted me, and I panicked. I only meant to scare her, to keep her quiet." "Scare her?" Elliot shot back, his voice filled with disgust. "You caused her death. That's not fear, that's murder." Buddy barked sharply, as if to echo Elliot's words. The dog stood protectively at Adam's side, his stance firm and resolute. It was as if Buddy knew justice was finally catching up to the man who had betrayed Margaret. The sound of sirens pierced the tense silence, growing louder as they neared the chapel. Moments later, 2 police officers entered, their expressions serious as they took in the scene. Walter quickly explained what had transpired, handing over the evidence. The officers approached Father Bernard, who now sat slumped on the floor, his head in his hands. "Father Bernard," one officer said, his voice stern, "you're under arrest for embezzlement and for your involvement in the death of Margaret Hayward. Please stand." The priest's face crumpled as he was pulled to his feet, handcuffs clicking into place. He didn't resist, his defeat complete. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the man they had once trusted was led out of the chapel. As the doors closed behind the police, the tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of justice. Margaret's voice, preserved in her letter, had spoken louder than Father Bernard's lies, and Buddy, her loyal companion, had ensured that her story was not buried with her. Adam knelt beside Buddy, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You did it, boy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You made sure Margaret's truth was heard." The crowd began to disperse, some lingering to thank Adam and Buddy for their courage. Walter patted Buddy's head, tears glistening in his eyes. "Margaret knew what she was doing when she trusted you," he said softly. "You're a hero, Buddy." As the chapel emptied, Adam and Buddy stood together, the weight of the day settling over them. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the village. Margaret's legacy, tarnished by betrayal, now stood restored, thanks to the unwavering loyalty of a golden retriever who refused to let her voice be silenced. The chapel emptied slowly, leaving Adam and Buddy standing in the quiet sanctuary. The once heavy air felt lighter now, as if Margaret's presence lingered. Content that her story had been told, and justice had been served. Adam knelt beside Buddy, running his fingers through the golden retriever's fur. "You really are something else, aren't you, boy?" Adam whispered. Buddy looked at him with those deep, soulful eyes, wagging his tail gently. It was as if the dog understood everything: the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the triumph of truth. Walter approached with a small smile. "Margaret would be proud," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "She always said Buddy was more than just a pet. She called him her guardian angel." Adam nodded, his throat tight. She was right. Without Buddy, we wouldn't have uncovered any of this. He knew Walter. He knew something wasn't right, and he never gave up. Buddy barked softly, nuzzling against Adam as if to reassure him. It was a bittersweet moment, but Adam knew that Margaret's story and her unwavering belief in her loyal companion had brought the truth to light. Later that evening, Adam returned to Margaret's quaint little home on the edge of the village. The house was filled with her spirit, photos of her life, keepsakes from her travels, and the warmth of a life lived in service to others. Buddy trotted in behind him, his tail wagging as he sniffed around the familiar space. Adam had made the decision to stay. Margaret's house was a part of her legacy, and it deserved to be cared for by someone who loved her as much as Buddy had. He sat on the worn leather couch, flipping through the pages of Margaret's journals. They were filled with stories of her charitable work, her thoughts on life, and countless mentions of Buddy. "Buddy is more than my dog. He's my heart. I trust him more than most people. If he could talk, I'm certain he'd have more wisdom than I ever will." Adam smiled through the sting of tears as he read her words. He glanced at Buddy, who was now curled up beside him, resting peacefully. "She was right about you," Adam said softly. "You're a better judge of character than any of us." In the following weeks, the village rallied together. Margaret's name became a symbol of resilience and kindness, and the orphanage she had dreamed of building was completed with funds raised by the community. The children adored Buddy, who became a frequent visitor at the new facility, bringing smiles wherever he went. Adam and Buddy became inseparable, just as Margaret and Buddy had been. Together, they carried on her legacy, ensuring her kindness and values continued to touch lives. And though Margaret was no longer physically present, her spirit lived on in the bond between Adam and Buddy, a bond forged by loyalty, trust, and the courage to seek the truth.